and we would like to welcome you to the Alameda County 18th Assembly District Candidates Forum. We are hosting this in sponsorship with Oakland African American Chamber and John George Democratic Club. We're going to give a brief overview of how tonight's forum will run. And we're asked just a little housekeeping information on the front end. We will introduce the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks and 1 minute to answer the question in the interest of time. We did get notice that one of the candidates may be a little tardy, Malia Villa, because she has a closed session. And whenever she comes on, we're going to allow her to join the group and give her 2 minutes. The candidates for tonight's forum, we have 6 candidates that are joining us this evening. The Honorable James Aguilar, San Leandro School Board. The Honorable Vice Mayor Victor Aguilar, San Leandro City Council. The Honorable Malia Villa, Alameda City Vice Mayor and Alameda City Council. Mia Banta, CEO of Oakland Promise, and Janani Ramchachandra, social justice attorney. And again, welcome to tonight's forum.
And Eugene Canson.
I'm so sorry, Eugene. Eugene Canson, thank you. And thank you for joining us, Eugene Canson. And Eugene, I did not get your bio, so you will have to go over what you do in your, when you speak for your 2 minutes. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Walter Riley. We are honored to have him join us tonight. Walter has been a civil rights activist for multiple years, and he serves on many boards, and he serves as a model to us all in terms of activism and movement for the people. Walter is currently a member of the California Bar Association, the National Lawyers Guild, Charles Houston Bar Association, ACLU, Black Lives Matter, Black Alliance for Just Immigration. He is a chair of the Michael John Civil Liberties Institute, co-chair of the John George Democratic Club, national board member of Black Worker Center, and chair of the Haiti Emergency Relief Fund. His activism has centered around education, schools, anti-apartheid, police misconduct, voter registration, cultural issues. Recently, Walter was the lead attorney for the Black Friday 14th and Black Lives Matter protesters. We are honored to have him join us and moderate for this evening's forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that I am one of the attorneys that's suing the City of Oakland and the Oakland Police Department at this moment for the conduct of the Oakland Police Department last year during the demonstrations when people were protesting police misconduct and violence across the nation, particularly during the George Floyd demonstrations. I believe someone is going to announce the time setup that we have tonight. Who's doing that?
Yes, so Jack Fleck will be our time. He will let you know. Can everyone see Jack? Jack, can you?
Okay, so I'm gonna hold up a sign when you have 30 seconds left, and then I'm gonna hold up another sign when your time is up. So just please respect those time limits. It's 2 minutes for the opening statement and 1 minute for all the questions, which we'll be having quite a few.
Thank you, Jack. And Jack is a diligent timekeeper. And we have also let everybody know that we want to keep on time as we do these, go through these things. So we're going to get started right away with the discussions. I think we will start in reverse order of the alphabetical order here. We're starting with Villa from Alameda. Is she on the call right now?
I see Malia here.
Malia, then Johnny, then Bonta. No, we're starting in reverse order. And so it starts with V, R, C, and A's. We have 2 A's. You have your time limits.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Malia Vella. I am the Vice Mayor of the City of Alameda. I am also a workers' rights attorney with the Teamsters Union and a professor of practice at Mills College. I have served on the City Council in Alameda for many years and been reelected. I've championed things like affordable housing, workforce housing, making sure that we have alternatives and programming for our unhoused neighbors. And making sure that we are also doing things to increase the minimum wage, make sure that we have career pathways and apprenticeship programs, and also make sure that we are dealing with equity issues during COVID-19 pandemic. I've made sure that we have tenant protections, including a rent cap, just cause protection, and I want to champion all of these things in the State Assembly and really focus on things with an eye and lens on equity and justice. I've also been working very hard on reimagining policing and making sure that Alameda responds and does its part to make sure that we really are a community for everybody and that everyone does belong here. I'm going to continue to work on these items at the state level. I would love to have your support. I'm sorry I cannot be here tonight for the entire forum. I have a city council meeting this evening and I need to make sure that I do my job that I've been elected for. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Can people, thank you. And we will give you an opportunity when you come back. Can people turn off their mics who are not speaking? There was some background noise at that time. Thank you very much. The next presentation will come from Janani Rachmanchandra. I saw you there, so I know you're on the line.
Hi there, can you hear me?
I can, yes. If you're talking now, no one can hear. I can't hear you, so.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Janani Ramachandran. I'm a social justice attorney, a former Oakland Public Ethics Commissioner, and a proud resident of Oakland's beautiful District 2. And I'm running for assembly because the voices of our community members, especially in Oakland, are being left out of the political process, which is why I'm fighting for tenant protections to allow people to stay in their neighborhoods and not be displaced due to the forces of gentrification. I'm fighting for a 10-year plan to address homelessness, which has risen right here in Oakland by over 45% in the past 2 years. I'm fighting for economic and unknown businesses and stop getting the short end of the stick. I'm fighting to end qualified immunity for police officers who cause harm and invest in life-saving community violence interventions like the ones I've worked with here in Oakland. I'm fighting for Medicare for all because your life expectancy should not depend on your zip code. And I'm fighting for a Green New Deal that prioritizes racial equity and amplifies efforts like No Coal in Oakland, because it is unacceptable that a child in West Oakland is 6 times more likely to suffer from asthma than their white counterparts. What drives me to run for state assembly is working with immigrant mothers experiencing domestic violence and criminalized by our so-called justice system. What drives me are all the people I've worked with experiencing mental health crises who have been failed by our public health systems. What drives me are the small businesses right here in Oakland that I've helped apply for state aid during the pandemic, only to see big businesses outside of this city taking their share of the pie and leaving our crumbs for us in Oakland. What drives me are all the elderly tenants on Seminary Road that I've represented being evicted from their homes, even in the middle of the pandemic. Our voices are being drowned out by political leaders who are too scared to push for change. So I ask you to join me in my movement to change these systems, and together we can achieve justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene Cranston.
Yes, how you doing? Well, hello, everyone. First, I want to thank the host for inviting me to participate in this discussion and engage with the community. I'm a public health professional and health equity advocate that is passionate about addressing the health and social inequities that have long existed in our communities. Like many others, my career has not been linear. Out of undergraduate school, I went to study public health to create behavioral change in our communities and address childhood obesity. But I quickly realized that upstream factors like policy significantly impact the well-being of our communities. After graduate school, I began to work with community health centers in Alameda County, fighting for policies that would increase the access to health care in our communities, including many undocumented immigrants who continue to be denied that critical coverage. I've collaborated with community and statewide organizations, along with community members, to address the structural inequities that exist in our society. And the next statement I'm about to make, I feel like I've made way too many times over the past few months, but I'm going to make it again. And that is that the inequities and disparities have been exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. And the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated and amplified the inequities and vulnerabilities that have long existed in our communities. Black and Latinx, Indigenous, and other communities of color were disproportionately hit by the pandemic. BIPOC communities did not just face the brunt of health impacts, they also faced the brunt of economic impacts. During my time with community health centers, I participated in community and county-wide discussions to respond to the pandemic in an equitable manner, ensure that access to testing, contact tracing were made available to the communities hit the hardest. Over the past few months, I've been leading the policy and advocacy efforts with the California Black Health Network. I've collaborated with other statewide organizations to ensure that communities of color are not left behind as our state recovers from the pandemic. And one thing is certain, our county and our state has chronically underinvested in public health for decades. We have underinvested in Black and Brown communities for decades. Systemic and structural inequities are deeply embedded in our society and in our policies. You don't have to look farther than the data on who is homeless in our state to understand that structural racism and inequities are there. We see that 40% of our homeless population is Black, although only 6% of our population in California is Black. We look at violence. Me, as a Black man in my 20s, I'm 20 times more likely to be a victim of homicide than my white counterpart, right? And I'll say that again. As a Black man in my 20s, I'm 20 times more likely to be a victim of homicide than my white counterpart. And we know that that's not due to the lack of morality in certain communities, but it's due to the poverty and social injustices that have stricken our communities. We know that poverty is okay. Thank you for the time, and I'll leave it there.
Mia Bonta.
Good evening. I'm Mia Bonta. I was raised by activists who, as members of the Young Lords Party in New York, were making the same demands for justice that the Black Panthers were making right here in Oakland: policing the police, a right to housing, food security, and equity in education, issues that 50 years later, we still must fight for. My parents taught me about the power of being an advocate through service, and I've been fighting for our children in East Bay communities for over 20 years. I come to my work in our community, not from theory, but from my own lived experience. And I see myself in so many of our young brothers and sisters. I grew up experiencing what it was like to watch a strong Black Latino woman have to make trade-offs at the end of the month between paying the rent, paying a doctor's bill, or putting food on the table. In working for Oakland's children and families, I have seen our community displaced, dismissed, and dying at the hands of supposed protectors and trapped by systems that we were not built to succeed in. I set up my business in West Oakland, work to ensure our communities have digital access, and currently serve as school board president in Alameda. I work every day to fulfill the promise of scholarships and college opportunities for Oakland children. I am running for assembly because we here in AD18 can no longer be displaced from the State House. The East Bay has not seen a Black woman in Sacramento since Honorable Barbara Lee. I'm running because we have work to do, and our representation, our experience, and our voice matters now more than ever. And as your state representative, I will be an advocate to help our families recover from COVID, get all our students and teachers back to school safely and with equity at the center this fall, and go after addressing the root causes of the displacement of our Black community and of homelessness, so that we ensure that our families, East Bay families, can stay here, rooted in Oakland and here in the East Bay. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Victor Aguilar.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Hi, my name is Victor Aguilar. I am vice mayor, proud son of immigrants from Mexico, and the first openly gay person elected to the San Leandro City Council. I have dedicated my life to serving those most in need in my community. And today, I'm running for the state assembly to fight for healthcare, housing, and justice for all. We need universal single-payer healthcare for all with expanded mental health services and funding to keep our public hospitals open. We need safe and affordable housing for all, including strong statewide protections for renters and permanent housing for persons experiencing homelessness. And we need justice for all. This includes racial justice. We must confront and root out racism in law enforcement, the criminal justice system, and throughout society. Economic justice. We must provide free universal preschool programs and other programs that enable parents to work to build pathways out of poverty. And climate and environmental justice. Climate change threatens all of us, but it's most damaging to communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. I would be a passionate and fearless champion for bold change, such as reinvesting in education, reimagining public safety, and fighting for higher wages, changes that will make real positive impacts to the people of Oakland, Alameda, San Leandro, and our beautiful state of California. I would be honored to have your support and serve you in Sacramento. Thank you so much for your time and this opportunity.
James Aguilar. Is James here? I think I saw him earlier.
He actually checked in. He won't be able to attend. There's a conflict of meeting for school board. He will try to join in later during the questions.
All right. So what we have planned for tonight are questions that are predetermined, presented by members of the groups that have been sponsoring this. And at the end of that period of answering these 10 questions, we will have other questions that will be presented through the chat. And I will have some questions, particularly around police reform and education issues, school boards issues at that time. We're going to start with the questions that have been presented to us. Each person will have 2 minutes to answer the questions.
1 minute, Walter.
1 minute, I'm sorry. 1 minute to answer the questions. There are enough of us here and we have enough questions. So we want to try and stick to our time limits as much as possible. I'll try not to talk too much. First question, and we'll start in, I want to start in the same order because quite frankly, I want to start with the folks that were listed at the bottom of the flyer. And each person will remember their order, and we'll then rotate the order. First question, Rob Bonta worked to stop illegal foreclosures of financially distressed homeowners. Will all of you as candidates commit to working as hard as you can and as practically as you can to stop illegal foreclosures and insist that Alameda County District Attorney Nancy O'Malley prosecute law-breaking loan services and protect and help keep people in their homes? The first person is Malia, still on? Then that will be,
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm still here. I think I'll be able to do this one question, then I'm going to probably have to jump back to my city council meeting. The answer is yes. I worked very hard on the legislation and making sure that our AG at the time took on the big banks that were offering these predatory loans. Back when I was a staffer for then Senate Majority Leader Ellen Corbett. I think Nancy O'Malley announced today she will not be seeking re-election. I think it's going to be very important that we not only push the district attorney to fight these foreclosures and these illegal foreclosures, but really make sure that we also have a good fighter and champion in the district attorney's seat. I think we have an opportunity to have sustained change. We have an opportunity to back somebody who's going to be a champion for working people, for working families, and the marginalized. And I think it's really important that we get somebody in the district attorney's seat. And I plan on supporting somebody that will do that is an alternative to what we currently have. Thank you.
Janani.
I absolutely support these efforts. And in fact, one of the top priorities of mine is to enact an immediate moratorium on all foreclosures during the pandemic and during the post-pandemic recovery period. I was not a fan of SB 91's flawed rental relief program that ended up going to the majority of landlords that were large corporate owners, mostly, who didn't even live in California. I would revise the use of our $2.5 billion rent relief program to support small landlords based in our district and based in California. I would also partner with the DA, hopefully very soon, that is Pamela Price, to enact a program along the lines of Kamala Harris's mortgage fraud strike force at the county level instead. And to me, hopefully that will comprise of both civil and criminal enforcement teams in order to do everything to take action on the fact that we're not just saying housing is a human right, but we are doing everything possible to support small landlords, to support small homeowners stay in their homes.
Eugene Cranston.
Yeah, sorry about that. But again, I would definitely support those efforts to stop foreclosures and on financially distressed homeowners. It's really important and a critical issue. I also believe it's important, and as Assembly member, I'll work to expand statewide protections for renters from unfair evictions and unaffordable rent increases, which can be done by strengthening the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 and building off of AB 1482 and removing the exemption for single-family homes, as well as lowering that cap. I also think it's critically important that we support tenants and invest in tenants and help them understand their rights to fight these issues and invest in education, invest in their right to attorney, invest in outreach, so they're playing at a level playing field with the landowners, with landlords, which oftentimes have more resources.
Thank you. We maybe failed to announce in the beginning that we are recording this. And of course, your feet will be held to the fire on any of your responses for all of the people here. Mia Bonta.
Thanks so much. I absolutely would support the ending of illegal foreclosures. Let's make no mistake, what happens when we lose our homes through predatory lending practices, through big banks that are setting us up to fail, when we take on mortgages that are set up for us not to know the details of that, is that we lose our homes, we lose our wealth. And in the Black community, especially when we're trying to make sure that we build up ourselves, build up our assets, build up our wealth, we need to make sure that we can stay in our homes. So I absolutely would support the ending of illegal foreclosures and continuing the work that we've already done in the State House to ensure that that happens. I think the key focus is making sure that we're focused on implementation of that and making it quick and easy access for people, our community, to know the resources that they can avail themselves of to take advantage of avoiding predatory lenders and big banks that come after us so that we can stay in our homes.
Victor Aguilar.
Thank you so much. Yes, I will partner with the DA to prosecute illegal foreclosures. As someone who has championed a moratorium on evictions here in San Leandro, we need to make sure that the state eviction moratorium should be extended from June further on down the line until September. We need to strengthen the homeowners bill rights of SB 818. We also need to pass legislation that will require foreclosure documentation that will allow the DA to determine which foreclosures are illegal. And then, lastly, we need to make sure that we, with the next DA, I'm proudly supporting Pamela Price for this, and we'll gladly work side by side with her to make sure that we keep our Black and brown brothers and sisters in these homes. Thank you so much.
James Aguilar. Knowing your place in the order, could you be prepared by unmuting yourself before the end of the speech? James Aguilar. He's not here?
No, he had a school board meeting.
Oh, that's right. Okay. That's my age. Now, the next question, we will start with Janani. COVID-19 crisis has wiped out nearly half of Black small businesses. What will be your long-term strategy for the impact of COVID-19 on Black, brown businesses?
Doing business in Oakland and much of this district has long been inequitable before the pandemic. Last year's disparities survey revealed that Black small businesses lost $43 million in city contracts over the past 15 years. And those racial disparities have only worsened during COVID. And we need to do everything possible as policymakers to protect Black businesses that have remained. We have an obligation to give people hope and opportunity for economic success. So I would implement a statewide small business entrepreneurship program for Black and brown businesses that are not just a loan program of sorts or tax credits, but actually a grant of several $1,000s to support businesses that can't afford a personal accountant or an attorney. I would also support the funding of a publicly available council to support Black and brown entrepreneurs get their organizations set up and off their feet. I would also support startup accelerators, including the E for All Entrepreneurship for All program, which I served on the founding exploratory team right here in Oakland to enable more individuals right here, particularly in East Oakland, to start their own.
Time's up.
Eugene?
Yes, so we know that COVID-19 has exacerbated not just the health inequities, but the economic inequities that has long existed in our communities. And we know that due to discriminatory lending practices and other structural inequities, Black-owned businesses haven't had access to the same level of financial capital. And research shows that 70% of Black entrepreneurs rely on personal and family savings for financing. And data also shows that Black folks don't have the same level of wealth as their counterparts. And so really long-term, we need to figure out ways to address the wealth inequity and the wealth gap in our communities and address poverty, as well as desegregating our communities and allowing Black folks and other communities of color to attain their wealth through home ownership. And we know that most folks attain their capital through home ownership, but too many of our Black communities don't have access to home ownership, and the Assembly will work to address that.
Mia Bonta.
I am a small a business owner in Oakland. I set up a small business nonprofit in West Oakland and had that, and I was a founder of that. As a founder, I knew that 2% of the capital that was available in venture capital was available to me as a Black woman. And I know that that's the experience, especially now in COVID, for many of our Black community members. Our Black business owners have had to face having their businesses closed down and not being able to have the same kind of quick access to the kind of protections through PPE loans that others have had. So as an Assembly member, it would be a priority for me to be able to lift up our Black community members and build up Black business, because when we build up Black business, we're building up Black wealth. In addition to making sure that we have targeted programs focused on our Black community members to build up their business and recover from COVID, I would ensure that we're going after the core issue that makes it difficult for the state to recognize that, which is going after Prop 209. When we're going after Prop 209, it means that we actually get to acknowledge that there is racial inequity in our business, in our contracting, and in our education and health, and all that runs the full gamut. So,
Time is up. Time is up.
Victor.
Thank you so much. This didn't start with COVID-19. Black people have always struggled against systemic oppression. Let's not act like this is a new problem. You know, I have a personal story, you know, with the black and brown folks being oppressed, and with COVID-19 and this story, how it affected all of us. You know, I lost my mother to COVID-19, and, you know, it hit close to home. And this is something that is just personal to me. And I don't ever want anybody to experience what I went through, the pain that I'm going through, and the mental health that I have to deal with, you know, all while doing good for the public. I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that our small businesses have loans and that they're able to have public banking. We need to focus on universal healthcare that helps small businesses. And one thing of the leading causes of the racial wealth gap is the lack of home ownership, which builds generational wealth. The same thing could apply to Black and brown businesses. Helping small businesses secure their own buildings and commercial space will allow them to build wealth and not be subject to rent increases that can make it hard for businesses to compete in the best of time. And under COVID has forced too many of the businesses out. The state can help Black and brown owned businesses with loans to help them purchase buildings.
Sorry. So we're starting with our next question.
Oh,
And-
I'm still here. This is the last question I can take, if that's okay. This is Malia.
Okay. You didn't get to this one, so yes, answer, respond.
So I think, you know, the big issue here is that communities of color, especially Black and brown individuals and entrepreneurs, do not have access to traditional commercial lending. We know this. We need to make sure that the state grants are being distributed in an equitable manner. That does not mean they are distributed equally. We know that small business owners in particular have missed out on the PPP program. We need to make sure we are giving grants, not loans. And we also need to invest in our communities of color and the small businesses that often help prevent having things like food deserts or childcare deserts. So this is something that's very important to making sure that all working people can get back to work. We need these supportive small businesses. We also need to invest in making sure that we repeal Prop 209 so that we can actually have affirmative action. We can focus on making sure that you know, contracting with the government can factor in race and make in the alternative, we also need to make sure that we can allow for these government contracts to allow for small businesses to collaborate together. So maybe instead of having one contract with a large employer, we can do it with a number of smaller employers. Thank you.
Thank you. Starting with Eugene. What is your position on the sale of the Coliseum public land to the billionaire John Fisher? Taking into consideration that the Oakland A's have already publicly announced that they will not be building a new stadium in East Oakland. What would be your leadership in protecting this city's interest in the use of the Coliseum land? And how will the sale affect the local businesses in the East Oakland community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would do all that I can to protect the city's and community's interests in the use of the land. I believe that there should be a community-driven development plan, and the use of the land should prioritize the well-being and the vitality of East Oakland residents and community members. You know, I wish Oakland, as many folks, I believe, I wish the Raiders would stay in, the A's would stay in Oakland. But I think right now, the important thing is that our communities are prioritized. And as a city member, I will ensure and work to prioritize all of our communities and all Oaklanders.
Mia, can we get specifics from folks when they talk about these issues, responses? Mia, you're up next.
I think like the Raiders and the Warriors before them, we need to recognize that the Oakland A's don't intend to stay in that East Oakland Stadium, but we need to ensure that they invest in the Oakland Coliseum site and hold them accountable to their commitment to build up that site as a thriving center, providing critical investments in services like job training, job navigation, affordable housing, youth and recreational opportunities, and community-based health services and supports. We can create a thriving center in East Oakland with that accountability. And we need to make sure that we have jobs for Oaklanders through community benefits programs as a part of that, and housing for Oaklanders as we build up that site, and have the open spaces, make sure to create the kind of cultural spaces that we need to build up Oakland. Yes, it's going to be tough for us, but we need to make sure that people are held accountable and that the A's are held accountable to building up that East Oakland thriving center so that we can finally have a thriving center in East Oakland.
Victor, you're up. Same question.
Thank you. Talk about a major disparity between the east side and the west side. You know, the prosperity of our community and our local businesses should always come first. This means East Oakland and focusing on developing that land that should protect and keep our families intact and preserve our community. We need no sweetheart deals for billionaire owners. The city should work with the Fisher family on the sale of the Coliseum and advocate for a mixed-use solution. We need to avoid the Howard terminal, to avoid $500 million in restructuring and infrastructure fees. Come on, this deal is going to cost the city of Oakland $500 million on infrastructure fees. This is ridiculous. We need to think about how this is going to affect our longshoremen, how this is going to affect the transportation of our goods. And this comes at a cost to the community. And we need to stop this. I think we need to work together to make sure that we benefit both sides and focus also on the east side as well as the west. But, you know, it all looks good on paper, but it's bad for everyone.
Where we're now with Janani.
Yeah. I stand with my fellow Oakland residents who originally opposed the sale of the Alameda County transfer of this land, including through resolutions passed by the Oakland East Bay Democratic Club, because we should never pursue policies that prioritize billionaire profits over our people. I support the Oakland United movement that ensures that strong community benefits results from any project involving the Coliseum or the A's, because public land must be used for public good. And I am very disappointed that the county sale did not include a strong community benefits agreement. And also dismayed that Oakland's public land strategy resolution that Oakland adopted 2 years ago did not specifically include Coliseum land. However, if the city does decide to sell this land, I believe that ASEG, the African American Sports and Entertainment Group, should be prioritized in buying the remaining share. And the city should do everything to support a Black-owned sports team like the Oakland Panthers to be able to come into this space. And as a policymaker, I would do everything possible to work with groups like Oakland United to provide community benefits that have not trickled down to any residents of East Oakland already. Thank
you. We're starting with our next question. I'm sure that Malia Bella is no longer here. Next question, Mia Bonta will answer first, and we'll go in that order. When the 6,000-page draft EIR Howard Terminal Baseball Complex went before the Planning Commission, 195 participants in attendance overwhelmingly expressed opposition to the project. More importantly, the infrastructure mitigation plan was absent from the report. The Oakland community is being asked to shoulder the environmental, infrastructure, and financial risk. What is your position and why? And how do you see the $400 million in infrastructure work being paid for?
I think that transparency in big land use deals is incredibly important. And I think that particularly as it relates to the environment, we shouldn't make sure that we're kind of cutting corners in that way. So I do believe that we need to go back and look at that EIR to make sure that the community is fully aware of the kinds of environmental impacts that any land use deal will have on the city. We need to make sure that we're focusing on funding that EIR, making it a transparent tool that the community can make use of, and that we have the ability to engage fully the community in those kinds of efforts.
Victor.
Thank you so much. If the plan is incomplete and riddled with holes, then why did the Assembly pass AB 1191 to allow a private developer to spend money on a stadium at the Howard Terminal if the city of Oakland is going to bear the brunt of shelling out $500 million on infrastructure? This is ridiculous. The city of Oakland should not be shelling out hundreds of millions of dollars to support this project. It seems clear that the Fisher family are trying to push this through for what works for them and not for the community. We have to put our community first.
Janani.
I am proud to be one of those 195 people who made public comment at that Planning Commission meeting. In fact, I was the very first candidate in this race who took an uncompromising, clear, and public stance against the Howard Terminal project. City Council should not be forced to vote preemptively because of the pressures by billionaires, and if so, should reject the proposal because billionaire interests are not economic development, they're not community development, and they're certainly not jobs. If we want to talk about jobs, let's talk about the 85,000 unionized jobs that are at the port, primarily held among our Black and brown longshoremen that are at stake. If maritime's threatened, the stock of our shelves in grocery stores are threatened, the price of our commodities are threatened to go up. Having visited Howard Terminal myself, I understand the critical need for a buffer zone between industry and commercial and residential space. Losing that zone, that critical turning basin, will certainly encourage companies to leave. Not to mention the environmental impacts. This project would increase emissions in Howard Terminal in that area of West Oakland, an area that has borne the brunt of environmental racism for decades by over 45%, an area that has 5 times the amount of toxic pollution than the rest of the Bay Area. Not to mention gentrification.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Time's up.
Thank you. Next question. We'll start with Victor. What has been your involvement in advocating for the residents of East Oakland? And do you have a Black agenda? If so, how will your advocacy for both impact your policy positions in Sacramento on issues relevant to our community if you are elected to this office?
Thank you so much for asking that question. Yes, I do have a Black agenda. First off, we need to support Pamela Price for DA. And also we need to make sure that we're taking important steps that can be taken to tackle the myriad of challenges we face, such as reparations for the lasting harms that were caused to African Americans by slavery and its continued effects, as well as people of color harmed by discriminatory policies. Policies that reduce barriers to home ownership and help build generational wealth long denied to Black and Indigenous people of color. We also need to focus on reducing and eliminating fees and fines which disproportionately impact people of color. Affirmative action to reduce disparities in employment and education. We also need to improve access to resources such as healthcare and healthy foods for predominantly Black neighborhoods. In addition, universal policies such as universal single-payer healthcare and free 4-year college tuition, which would help everyone. In the meantime, it's imperative to protect Medicaid, Medi-Cal expansion under the Affordable Care Act, and we should examine ways to expand Medi-Cal access to all. We also must redouble our efforts to educate our underserved communities and get more people enrolled in covered California.
Thank you. Janani. Janani, you were next. You're after. Did you answer this question?
Hi, sorry, I had tech issues for a second. We need to keep Black people housed in Oakland, offer economic opportunity, clean air, quality schools. Oakland's Black population has been declining. We have lost 25% of this population in the past 20 years. So as far as my involvement with the East Oakland community goes, I've represented Oakland tenants facing eviction from some of the most notoriously corrupt landlords in Oakland. I've represented East Oakland survivors of domestic violence in family court. And I've served perpetrators of violence too, through critical restorative justice programs in East Oakland. I've served on the founding committee for an entrepreneurship program to support East Oakland-based small businesses. I've helped small East Oakland businesses apply for CARES Act funding. I've given multiple bilingual community Know Your Rights legal trainings to tenants groups in East Oakland, and I participate in mutual aid programs every week to keep our communities fed and safe. And as a legislator, I want to enact policies needed to repeal state laws that are anti-tenant so Oakland can keep more people housed. I would enact a 10-year strategic plan on homelessness so that the $13 billion we actually spend goes somewhere.
Time is up. Time is up.
Eugene.
Yes, absolutely. I strongly believe that my platform would support Black communities throughout the state and in East Oakland. During my time as a policy advocate for community health centers in the East Bay, I've advocated strongly for issues pertaining to health and well-being of residents in East Oakland. And even now with California Black Health Network, we're pushing forward a budget request, $180 million to invest in community-based organizations, clinics, tribes, to address the structural issues and inequities in our society, from access to healthcare, access to healthy food, affordable housing, and issues pertaining to environmental justice. all things that negatively impact the Black community, and those investments are critical.
Mia Banta.
I've been a part of making sure that in East Oakland, the infrastructure that we need so that children have books in their home and education that they can look forward to has been the primary focus of mine for the last 20 years in Oakland, through ensuring that we have digital connectivity as a core piece of that in places like Pride and Prescott and Havens Court. For me, the Black agenda is about education, ensuring that we have early childhood education, literacy, and access to college in numbers that we need to be able to see to ensure that we can be building and living up with our future generation. We need to replace the school to prison pipeline with a school to prosperity pipeline, ensure that we have reparations for our Black students, ensure that we have anti-displacement tenant protections in place so that we can stay in our homes, so that we can stay on our lands and we can be a part of this Oakland community as we move forward. And we need to ensure that we have wealth building opportunities in East Oakland through entrepreneurship, business contracting and ownership, and that we have home ownership so that we can have more people being able to stay in their homes and a part of this Oakland community, because our Black members have been displaced for far too long in Oakland.
Next question, we will start with Eugene Canton. If elected to this position, will you commit to hiring district staff that are familiar with the issues impacting our community, particularly issues of over-policing in East Oakland, displacement of African Americans, the epidemic of gun violence, sex trafficking, and the lack of economic investment opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely commit to hiring district staff and a team that is from those communities and knows what's happening on the ground, and has an ear to the ground, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to make a strong impact. And as I mentioned earlier, one of my biggest priorities and passions is addressing violence in our communities. I'm a resident of West Oakland, and I see it every day. And I know there's violence in East Oakland as well, and community members on the ground really know what's happening and how to address it. So I would definitely have them on my team.
Mia Banta.
Yes, I would fully commit to that, not only in the district office, but the Capitol office as well, where legislation happens, where we need actually more Black representation and staffers helping to forward legislation in that. Of course, we need our district office to make sure that it is fully representative of East Oakland and other parts of Oakland, and that we have Black members, in particular African Americans, representing our public. We need an assembly member who will deliver for East Oakland and ensure that our underserved AD18 communities are getting their fair share of the $100 billion state plus surplus that we have. And we need to address the underlying causes that you've mentioned, poverty, failing schools and systems, which time and time again leave our Black and brown communities left behind. This seat is a seat that should be held by a Black assembly member because we need to make sure that we have representation at all levels of government and state and on staff, and people who know and are of this community to be able to lead it, to be able to lead a strong effort in terms of representation for AD18.
Victor.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we hire people who understand the issues and source from within Oakland itself. We also need to source from Alameda, San Leandro, and make sure that we have representation from our community in Sacramento. I think it's very imperative that we work with our community to make sure that we're addressing the issues of the epidemic on gun violence and sex trafficking and the lack of investment and opportunity. I think, we need to focus. We have a perfect example of what's happening with the A Stadium. We need to make sure that we're having opportunity in East Oakland and make sure that we're transforming that and working with our community. Yes, we need people to understand what's going on in the community. And the people I hire are going to be those on the front lines committed to fighting for justice, for displaced communities, against police brutality, and for economic opportunities. So as someone here in San Leandro who stands up to the police to make sure that they're held accountable, that is something that I can be held accountable to. I have a proven track record of advocating for police audits, for standing up to injustice, and to making sure that we have police.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Time's up. Thank you. Next question. I think we start with.
Oh, I didn't have a chance to respond.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I very much believe representation matters, and I would set up a district advisory council that's not just full of people appointed by our mayor, but actually appointed members from the community, from our diverse community, particularly in Oakland, which has been left out of state level politics for generations. This advisory council to me would be filled with people who have been historically underrepresented and who do not have power in Sacramento, including youth, including our reentry population, including small businesses, including people who work at community-based nonprofits, and of course, our elders, all people whose voices have been silenced. I don't want to be a representative that simply listens to community members. I'm not just going to hold community forums to say I listen but not actually take action on it. I'm going to be a policymaker that centers the voices of people in this district advisory council, that centers the voices of people who do not have a voice in Sacramento. And this requires an assembly member who is willing to take the risk, willing to take the steps to actually engage with their community, something I've done my entire life.
Thank you. Starting with question number 7, I think it's Mia Bonta that's up first here. Police accountability, immigration. There have been dozens of complaints against Sheriff Ahern and his office and staff. During the last administration, he collaborated with ICE, although California is a sanctuary state. Additional complaints include, but are not limited to, prisoner abuse, excessive force, inadequate medical care, squalid jail conditions, anti-immigrant practices costing Alameda County over $15.5 million in settlements and judgments. How will your office assure that this office is also held accountable and that there be transparency in this department, in that department? Will you support a complete financial and performance audit of the sheriff's budget and practices?
We all know that there's very little to no trust between our community and especially the Black community and law enforcement. You can't have trust without accountability. So yes, we need more oversight, transparency, and consequences for officers and law enforcement agencies, and for officers to be held to account when they transgress and commit crimes and misconduct against the public. That's why I support Senator Bradford's bill, SB 2, which allows us to decertify police officers, because we all know that law enforcement officers shouldn't be able to commit serious misconduct against people in one county and pop up in another county. And that goes for Sheriff Ahern too. Which is why I'm also in support of AB 1506, which requires the California State Attorney General to conduct independent investigations that result in the death of an unarmed California. And we need the California State Attorney General to step up and start an implementation czar position that would allow us to be able to look at issues related to immigration and ICE and the practices of Sheriff Ahern and the like, to ensure that we have no way for us to be able to be taken advantage of.
Thank you. Victor.
What we need to do is we need for Joanne Walker for sheriff and Pamela Price for just to get changed. And Leandro, making sure that our police don't get away with murder. We need to make sure that we're emphasizing a non-police response to mental health and behavioral health situations, investing in public health and social services, ending all contracts with private prisons. We also need to make sure that we're lowering the incarceration rate and providing more supportive reentry services. We also need to dismantle the school to prison pipeline in all its 7 and abolishing the death penalty, ending mandatory minimum sentencing. We also need to make sure we decriminalize the certain hallucinogenic substances, which is SB 519. And we need to support Proposition 25 to uphold Senate Bill 10, which will replace cash bail with risk assessments for detained suspects in trial. Cash bail is wealthy, while risk assessment it's in the right to rust.
We sort of lost you there, Victor, for a while. I'm not sure what happened. You were breaking up, so I don't know what else to say, but the time has gone well over.
You might have a chance to say some of these things that you have been saying all along, and some of the other responses. We're going now to Janani.
1,127 people were killed at the hands of police last year, and every single one of them and their families deserve justice. Transparency matters, and bills like AB 1421 are steps in the right direction, but we need more. We need to set up local enforcement mechanisms to make sure that police aren't just required to transfer body cam footage, to transfer and publish public records, because having served on the Oakland Public Ethics Commission, I know that the majority of our Sunshine Ordinance request cases are police not submitting public records requests that they are legally obliged to. So it's beyond legislation that says police must do something. It's beyond legislation that says qualified immunity shouldn't exist. It's actual policymakers and local enforcement mechanisms that can allow these things to happen. We also do need to elect a sheriff who represents our values. I personally also support Joanne Walker for sheriff, and I was an active supporter of SB 271 that would allow people who are not trained law enforcement officers to serve as sheriff, because there is a diversity of life experiences that can be used towards that role, not just police enforcement.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yes, accountability and transparency is critical. And I agree with Mia Bonta. I support SB2 to allow police officers to be decertified. If we really want to move forward as a community and build trust between community members and our local law enforcement, we have to have that accountability. I also would work to diligently protect immigrants in our communities and advocate for the protections of policies such as the Truth Act, which works to bring that transparency to local law enforcement interactions with immigration enforcement. And I would definitely push for accountability and transparency, not only in local law enforcement and police officers, but as well as the sheriffs, with the sheriff office here in Alameda County.
Thank you. As a non-scripted question, how many of you, or do you take donations, funding, support from, financial support from law enforcement for your campaign? Yes or no, starting with Mia.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Victor.
Hell no.
Janani.
No.
Eugene.
No.
Next question will be Victor answering first. Equity and resources. It has become very visible that the county as a whole does not distribute resources equally among the different cities and communities. How will you ensure race and equity data tools are used to resource services to our most valuable communities?
So California's economy produces more than $1 trillion, more than the next most productive state, yet our supplemental poverty rate, the lack of economic resources for consumption of basic needs such as food, housing, clothing, and utilities is 23%, the highest in the nation. And one of the most shocking statistics is that California has more children living in poverty than any other state in the US. If the racial wealth divide is left unaddressed and is not exacerbated further over the next 8 years, median Black household wealth is on a path to hit zero by 2053. Median Latino household wealth is projected to hit zero 20 years later or by 2073. In sharp contrast, median white household wealth would climb to $137,000 by 2053 and $147,000 by 2073. It's time to renew our social compact. We need a new deal that's dynamic, green, and inclusive, and I will fight for that in Sacramento for everyone.
Janani.
I'm going to say this one more time because it is just so good. Last year's disparity surveys revealed that Black small businesses lost $43 million in city contract over the past 15 years. If this doesn't demonstrate racial inequities in our economic system, I don't know what else does. While working with the Berkeley CARES Act project, it was to support small businesses in Oakland apply for SBA and CARES Act funding. It was very clear the kinds of businesses that were able to get a slice of this pie and the big businesses outside of Oakland that actually took this money. Data tools that I would specifically support in order to reconcile these differences in racial and economic inequity include data disaggregation to tools that can show which communities are specifically harmed by inequitable policies, something that I am actively pursuing on the State Commission for API Affairs. We have state legislation requiring health departments, education departments to disaggregate data specifically to a variety of ethnic communities, but this still doesn't happen. I also believe that a diverse set of voices at the table truly matters, both in terms of the ballot box, because the majority of voters in Oakland do not even know a special election is happening, and representation at the polls.
Eugene?
Yes, and thank you for the question. And a part of my campaign message is ensuring that we move California boldly towards equity. And that means providing communities the resources that they need. And it's important to understand that ensuring equity in resources does not mean the same thing as ensuring equality in resources. And so something that I'm working on now in regard to this $180 million fund to invest in our communities to address the social impacts in our communities, embedded in that policy is a process that utilizes social indexes of health to ensure that the funds are going towards organizations and communities that have been disproportionately impacted. And so not just in health, but also as we recover economically from this pandemic as a state, it should be a priority, and it's critically important that we fund those who need it the most and in an equitable manner.
Mia Bonta.
Absolutely, we need to make sure that we're using racial disparity data to be able to understand what's going on. But let's all face the facts. We know what's going on in terms of racial inequity, and that we have a driver of race as the primary determinant for the ways in which people have been experiencing for generations inequities in housing, in health, in education, and in economic development and in wealth. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're not only focusing on looking at those racial disparities, but that we're doing something about them, which is why we have to go after Prop 209, not only with a legislative agenda, but a legal agenda, like we did for Brown v. Board of Ed, bring those cases forward to make sure that we get rid of Prop 209, which keeps us colorblind and makes us not be able to recognize the ways in which we continue to have our communities, particularly our Black communities, experience inequities in all realms of our society.
Thank you. We'll start with Jadani. Homelessness is a concern for the various clubs. As a result of COVID, some of the unhoused have been temporarily housed in hotels, such as the Radisson, Holiday Inn, Motel 6 on Hagenberger. Redevelopment dollars would have helped provide housing funds. How would you handle the homeless situation and provide affordable housing for East Oakland and the rest of the 18th?
Having personally worked with survivors of abuse housed in some of those motels you mentioned, I want to reiterate that our lack of tenant protections and our poor homelessness services in Oakland and across the state are some of the very reasons I chose to run for this seat. As mentioned earlier, homelessness in Oakland increased 45% over the past few years and are disproportionately Black individuals with children. We spend $13 billion on homelessness as a state across 12 different agencies. We do not need piecemeal money thrown around in order to look good for political gain and press statements. What we need is a 10-year strategic, comprehensive plan. And our mayor also needs to start demonstrating leadership and not siphoning off funds to non-relevant projects and utilizing our homelessness for the wrong budget for the wrong things, and stop appropriating funds to politically favored contractors. We also need to start using public land to address homelessness. Alameda County and the city need to follow through with a handful of council members that in fact do want to explore vacant lots and turn them into housing for houseless individuals. We also certainly need to restore the ability of local governments to use redevelopment dollars to fund social housing program for low-income communities, housing that's actually affordable.
Thanks.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yes, well, I think it's about investments. We must invest in addressing homelessness and put it in our budget. And I know that the administration has really prioritized this issue, but I also feel that we must prioritize homelessness prevention. We need to keep people housed by investing in homeless prevention and directing services to those that need it the most. For every one person that returns to housing, 3 people fall into homelessness. At this rate, we're never going to really address the cycle. And so we must provide access to services, protect people experiencing homelessness with shelter, mental health care, hygiene services, safe parking, job programs. We also realize the inequities. Data shows that homelessness in Alameda County has doubled in the last 4 years. 47% are African-American, 42% are seniors 50 plus, age 50 and older. So we really have to look at what the reasons are and what causes those inequities. And I really think it's a structural issue and investing in our communities. But again, prevention, prevention, prevention.
Mia Banta.
Addressing homelessness is a top priority for me. It would be for someone who's moved 13 times in 16 years and know what it's like to have housing insecurity at different points. And we know that the face of homelessness has changed with more children and families finding themselves one paycheck away from a home, and more of our folks needing mental health supports, being disconnected from their families and finding themselves in spaces where they aren't connected and in home. Especially during COVID, you can know that we couldn't shelter everyone because they didn't have a shelter. And we know that the short-term fix for Project Room Key needs to turn into the long-term fix of Project Home Key to get investments in and keeping people housed, in getting them homed. And we need to make sure that our budget is a reflection of our values in doing so. So how are cities evaluating vacant buildings and land use is something that we need to consider for Alameda County as a whole, and knowing how much land is available and how we use our vacant properties and vacant buildings to be able to do that is critical for city-owned as well. Thank you.
Victor.
Thank you so much. As someone who has been homeless, who has couch surfed, who couldn't afford to stay in the dorms when I went to college, there's a lot to say. We need to make sure that we hold Governor Newsom accountable for that $12 billion that has been set aside to house our homeless. It is disgusting to see what is going on. We need community land trusts, public and social housing. We need cooperative housing. We need nonprofit built affordable housing. We can't rely on the markets, real estate, or for-profit developers to get us out of this mess. We have to decommoditize housing one step at a time. We need to repeal Costa-Hawkins and the Alice Act. We need a housing first model to support those that have become homeless, and stronger tenant protections but rents people eviction needs to be extended to prevent our homeless population from growing. That's why a main tenet of my campaign is housing for all Californians.
Thank you. Our last question that's preset. And after this, we'll have other questions that we will present through the chat. And the first respondent will be Janani. How strongly do you prioritize the Green New Deal? The last Assembly member, Banta, introduced the Green New Deal bill, and we want to know if you will also show leadership on climate issues, and what specifically?
Absolutely. Prioritizing a Green New Deal now, not 20 years from now, not 20 years from now, is absolutely one of my top priorities, because our climate and our communities impacted by climate change cannot wait. My Green New Deal proposals of multiple bills will include policies with the racial equity lens. For example, we can't just prioritize having emission-free public transit in communities that are wealthy, but we need to make sure that these are first implemented in neighborhoods most impacted by decades of environmental racism, including parts of East Oakland and West Oakland. My Green New Deal would also include supporting efforts like no coal in Oakland. Solutions to climate change have to certainly include oil and gas extraction, but must also include environmental harms caused by the transportation of coal. I would support bills like SB 467 to increase buffer zones around oil and gas extractions, because too many communities, too many schools, too many people have lived on the fence lines of extremely toxic industries. And I would implement legislation along the lines of SB 260 as well, to hold corporations that are polluting accountable. And one of the main reasons why these laws don't pass is because of the power of oil and gas in Sacramento.
Time's up.
Eugene?
Yes, I would definitely be a strongly advocate for issues to address climate change and climate justice. We really know that climate change also disproportionately impacts communities of color. I think oftentimes that gets left out of the conversations. And so in the assembly, it will be critically important to ensure that environmental justice leaders are a part of conversations and at the table in regards to climate change. And as I said, mentioned earlier, I live in West Oakland, and I live in an area that is disproportionately impacted by stationary air pollutants. And I believe that needs to be a big part of the conversation as well. What are we going to do to address the disproportionate amount of stationary air pollutants in communities that have been impacted for far too long? So yes, that is a priority for sure.
Thank you. Mia Banta.
It's absolutely a priority. In our district, we want to be able to create jobs and housing while healing our environment. And these issues are inextricably linked with equity. Reducing our daily commute distances is one of the biggest individual impacts we can have to make sure that we have fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and ensuring that we have decreased harmful pollutants, ensuring greater environmental protections in West Oakland and East Oakland that have been disproportionately impacted and hit hard by decades of polluting industries. It's reflected in the disparities that we have in our life expectancy between East Oakland and the hills. And we know that the climate crisis is real. We know that we need to be on the right side of history here. And we know that we are facing in AD18 rising sea levels. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that the Green New Deal becomes a possibility and a reality by creating jobs, housing, being informed by the impacts of sea level rise, and focused on making sure that we have environmental justice at the heart of this district, because we've been disproportionately burdened by the climate crisis that has been committed by big corporations for far too long.
Thank you. Victor.
Thank you. I think as automation continues to rise and threatens our workforce, we need policies that will protect their jobs. That's why the Green Deal plans call for increasing jobs for workers and green infrastructure and creating new blue-collar jobs in the internet age. Other common sense measures include prohibiting the use of public funds for automation that eliminate jobs. We need to regulate the expansion of automation and technology that replaces workers, lower vote thresholds for raising new revenue at the state and local level to a majority vote. We also need to expand public programs to support workers who lose their jobs due to automation. We need to create a new tax on job eliminating automation with the funds going to benefit displaced workers. Yes, I will work hard to protect the environment so California can be at the forefront of mitigating our carbon emissions and environmental harm. But it's important to remember that a Green New Deal can't be possible without reform to our current system. Everything else, our economy is not designed to support the environment and has been prioritized above everything else. It's hard working towards our destruction. We need to make sure that people have healthcare, jobs, and education, and address the fundamental inequalities with access to these and other services in order to build a sustainable economy. We must make sure our priorities are.
Time's up.
We have come to the point where we are looking for hands for folks who might ask questions. This has been a enlightening discussion, I believe, from the comments in the chat, and certainly for me, my experience. It is a formidable group of folks that are running, the folks that have been on here for a long time, and I believe that this discussion is long overdue in Oakland and the Bay Area. The discussions and the points of views that are being expressed tonight, we have not had those in this East Bay, by and large, for a group of candidates, certainly not a cohort such as this. Be interesting as we develop in the campaign. Looking for hands if folks have questions. I'm going to start with one question. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but some of the organizers will be watching to see if we have hands. Oh, okay. We have I don't know which came up first. I see David Blake.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything tonight. Maybe I missed it on the question of land use and Scott Wiener and Nancy Skinner's various attempts to pass legislation to densify around BART stations and other mass transit hubs. And I would just like a general response from everybody where they stand on on their efforts.
We will start with Mia Banta here.
I am in favor of making sure that we are focusing on housing production, housing preservation, and most importantly, housing protection and tenant protection in that. I think one of the challenges that we have is ensuring that while we're focusing on building up our land, particularly around our centers to decrease environmental impacts and make sure that we have affordable housing available, we also need to make sure that our tenants are fully protected and that they're a part of the conversation in a very, very deep way to make sure that tenant protections are in place while we consider housing production as a primary need throughout the district.
Victor?
Thank you for asking that question. I think we need to make sure that we're upzoning and that we're allowing housing, affordable housing, all types of housing along public transit system. This is something that will help to create jobs, but also to help eliminate our carbon footprint here in California. And we need to do this and support Scott Wiener in this access to make sure that we're, sorry, somebody's is not on mute. But I think we need to make sure that we do support housing around public transportation.
Janani?
I support upzoning and undoing the legacy of racist redlining policies, but I do so with the caveat of a tenants' rights lens. There's no point of a blanket upzoning in a place like Oakland because any new properties that you build are not going to be rent controlled. So we need to upzone while repealing Costa-Hawkins. We need to upzone while preventing the demolition of properties that have been long-term rent controlled units in order to prevent displacement of our communities. My personal priority is we certainly do have a shortage of housing. In fact, we need to build 250,000 units per year in California in different income categories in order for supply to start to reach demand. But my personal priority is to build affordable housing, because if you go down Oakland, you can see plenty of large multifamily units that are market rate that are sitting vacant right here in Oakland. So I think the priorities for me vary based on the needs of this district. But yes, I generally support upzoning with a tenants' rights framework.
Eugene?
Yes, and I think the fact of the matter is that we don't have enough affordable housing, right, in the state, but especially here in the Bay Area. So I support upzoning. I support housing production and increasing access to affordable housing. And to me, I think it's an issue of morality. And as a state, we have to really think about how long are we going to let our community members not have access to homes. Housing, I believe, is a right. And so this is, I believe, a step in the right direction regarding Senator Skinner and Senator Arena.
All right. I think the next person that was up was Christine Loomis with her hand.
Thank you. I would like to know if people support the bill 1177, which proposes to create a public bank here in California. The concept was to get rid of a lot of the fees and obnoxious charges of the large banks, which have really been preying upon often poor workers.
Okay, we're starting with Victor, Janani, Eugene, and Mia Banta.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think support this bill. We also need to make sure that we support our cannabis industry to have a bank account. It's horrible that they do a lot of cash transaction. It's mind baffling. But I think, yes, we need to support this bill. And thank you so much for asking this question.
Janani.
Absolutely. Public banks are powerful tools in order to keep taxpayer dollars within the communities. Cities and counties currently hold billions of dollars of public money in Wall Street banks, which have historically been used to finance extremely harmful and profitable industries, including private prison, ICE detention centers, fossil fuel pipelines, and, as what's in the news lately, harmful corporations that cause harm in Israel. So public grants provide the opportunity to give an alternative banking system through locally controlled measures enabling communities to recapture public dollars.
And I would say I agree that I would support this effort, Assembly Bill 1177, to for this public bank, as was mentioned by the other candidates. We need to keep these funds in our communities. So thanks for the question. I do support.
Mia.
I support as well. I think it's the value of ensuring that our undocumented neighbors and community members, our cannabis industry and small business owners have the ability to have financial justice and equity as well. So I fully support supporting the public bank in California to get rid of the kinds of fees and obnoxious practices of banks that keep too many of us unbanked in our community.
We're going to end this session forum at 8 o'clock. And I believe that's our intent. So we're at 7:53 right now.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry.
ahead.
We actually are going to go to 8:30. We have a
Oh.
few questions that are also in the chat as well.
Okay, all
If
right,
people will stay with us.
all right. I'm not catching up with everything in the chat, so if you can help me with that, given the,
So I have Annie
most of the-
next, and then Judith, and then a question from Naomi in the chat.
Annie.
Great. Thank you. So my question to all of the candidates is a pretty simple one. Will you commit to refusing all corporate donations? Yes, I mean all. Why or why not, regardless of how you answer?
We starting with Janani.
Absolutely, because corporations have had too much power in Sacramento in every single industry. In fact, I have returned multiple $1,000 checks from corporations because I have publicly declared that I'm a corporate-free candidate, rejecting corporate money from all corporations, the oil and gas industry and their executives, Big Pharma and their executives, PG&E, which 97% of our current state legislators take money from, all prison and police guard unions, and all billionaires.
Eugene.
Yes, yes, I will, and I agree that corporate organizations, their influence has been too strong for far too long, and the influence of politics is detrimental to our democracy, in my opinion. And so I will not accept corporate donations or contributions.
Mia Bantam.
I have accepted contributions from small business owners and businesses who have supported me and known me for a very long time.
Victor.
Thank you for that. I am not in bed with corporations. I am unbought and unbossed. I am somebody who will not take money from corporations. It's listed on my campaign. You can go ahead and take a look at that. Thank you.
Next person to ask a question.
Judith was next, and then we'll take the question from Naomi from the chat, followed by Howard and then Cheryl.
Hello. Thank you all. I would say that until this last answer where Mia Banta differed from all of the others, so far tonight we've heard basically no differences in policy from any of the speakers. And I'd like each of the candidates to say what they think distinguishes them from the others. What is the issue or the policy or the capacity that they have that none of the other candidates does?
Eugene, you're first.
Yes, thank you for the question, Judith. I think what distinguishes me from the other candidates is my background in public health, and it's really the tenet of why I'm running, especially coming off of the coronavirus pandemic and understanding from the advocacy that I've been doing over the past few years that there truly needs to be more public health voices in the legislature. And we see that because we've chronically underinvested in public health at the federal and the state level. And if you look at the administration's May budget revise, and I don't want to talk against the administration here, but they did not invest in any new funds into public health. Coming off of a public health pandemic, no new monies towards public health. And so in the assembly, I will prioritize investing in public health, looking upstream and addressing the inequities that have caused the disparities to be exacerbated. Unless we invest in public health, we will continue to be in the situation that we are today with the inequities and disparities. And I believe that's what distinguishes me.
Thank you. Mia Bonta.
I've had 20 years of service in the community in Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro, serving and fighting for the children and families of Oakland. And I've done that, touching every single voter and community member through their children and their families to be able to do that. I also know that close to 50% of the general fund goes towards education. And I've dedicated my life to educational opportunity and knowing the systems, the public school systems in and out, which is why I'm thankful to have the support of the CTA and CSEA in my candidacy. And finally, I've been very close to this work of what it means to be a legislator, what it takes to be a legislator. And I have the relationships in the legislature to be able to build on from day one. I have the endorsement of 21 legislators who are sitting right now, and the endorsement of the California Legislative Black Caucus, as well as the California Latino Legislative Caucus. So I'm a known entity. And at the end of the day, in order to be able to get any of this legislation passed, you have to be able to have the relationships, you have to have the know-how, and you have the ability to make sure that you can represent your district with full force in Sacramento.
Janani Rachman Chandra.
If someone's perfectly happy with status quo politics and the way our state government functions, then sure, you should appoint someone with vast experience in the political world. But if you're ready for something different and for someone who's going to be an agent of change, you should support an individual like me who has a combination of community work my entire career and an understanding and background in the law. Serving as a home visiting case manager at a community health clinic, I've entered the homes of mothers who are about to become homeless and suffering domestic violence with their abusers in the next room. I've worked with people experiencing mental health crises and seeing them repeatedly failed time and time and again by our healthcare system. And I've worked with elderly tenants right here on Seminary Road who are threatened to be evicted from their homes despite the fact that they live in horrid conditions and have never missed a day of rent. But what really differentiates me in this race is that I'm not afraid to be unpopular and take bold measures and say bold things regardless of how they come across. I was the first candidate in this race to openly oppose the Howard Terminal project. I believe I'm the only to openly support the rights of Palestinians in this current moment. I'm not a politician that's just going to say healthcare is a human right, but I've actually been to CalCare rallies. I've been on phone banks, and I've been in text banks, and I've given public testimony about why I believe we need universal healthcare now. And I'm certainly not saying just simply housing is a human right. In fact, I helped draft the legislation to reform the Ellis Act that was introduced most recently. I've represented tenants facing eviction, and all of these stories influence me and the kind of legislator that I'm going to be.
Time's up.
Eugene.
Eugene already went. It's
Okay, so we're starting with a new question.
Victor.
Then.
Victor hasn't gone.
Victor. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, I think what separates me, you know, I know what it's like to be on free and reduced lunch. I know what it's like to stand in line and wait for an EBT card. You know, I swallowed my pride and went in and, you know what it's like. I've been unhoused. I've also know what it's like to make sure, you know, to have been uninsured, to have no insurance, and whether or not just make a deciding factor, do I go to the hospital because I can't afford this bill? You know, as I'm someone who has lived life experiences, I am not a rubber stamper. I know what it's like to be unlike. I know what it's like to not have allies because I think differently. I know what it's like to push for policy to support it when it's enough. Push for policy and also be successful to support change in our community, to advocate for hazard pay for our grocery workers who put their lives at risk, who are on the front line. I know what it's like to, you know, advocate for a moratorium on eviction and champion capping delivery fees on DoorDash and Uber Eats. Yeah, I know what it's like to be that person.
Time's up. Time's up.
And I will champion that in Sacramento.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to the next question now then.
Yes, the next question was in the chat from Naomi. Her question was, will you take campaign contributions from large developers?
And that next person would be starting with Mia Bonta.
I have a very good family friend who is a developer who I've known over 25 years. I've accepted funds from them.
Victor.
I am not in bed with developers, know where I take developer money.
Janani.
No corporate money means no corporate money. Absolutely not developers.
Eugene.
No, and again, I believe that influence could be detrimental.
Next question.
Next is Howard, Cheryl, and then Billie Jean.
Howard, you're mute. You're on mute, Howard.
Can we move to Billie Jean and come back to Howard?
Yes. Billie Jean, you're. Okay.
Yes, good evening. Can I be heard? Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my question for all of the candidates is, can you all commit to, and also what will you do to ensure that your staff people are more than just letter filers or message carriers back and forth from your constituents to yourself? There's been some very poignant questions posed tonight. So say, for instance, if a major or even minor foreclosure issue comes up that is affecting one or more families, you have someone on your staff that actually may have experience in handling that. You won't be able to do everything for yourselves if it's a unhoused issue. I guess a better way to put my question is, will you be seeking out people that actually have these life experiences and in dealing with other assembly members or other politicians, police chiefs, et cetera? Thank you.
We're starting with Eugene.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the question. I think it's critically important to have a team that is tapped in with the community and has experiences in different facets and different roles. Legislators come from different backgrounds. I come from a background of public health, as I mentioned. So I obviously need someone on my team who has experience in other areas that may not be my sole focus. So for me to be an effective legislator, I would need to have a team that is well-versed in different areas and is tapped in with the community.
Mia.
I've been a person who has been affected by ineffective systems throughout the course of my life. So I'm going to be #1 staffer in that regard. And I know that the best way to be able to support and lift up constituents is making sure that you have people on the ground, both in the district and in the capital, who actually know what it's like to be a part of those systems and not served by those state systems. So yes, absolutely. I would make sure to bring out the leaders in our community who know what it's like to be disaffected and make sure that they're put into places of power as a part of the legislature to ensure that they have the ability to, in turn, support their fellow community members with leadership, with agency, with their own voice, with their own opinion, and with their own efficacy and agency in being able to do that. Has been my love to be able to support many leaders with that approach.
Victor Aguilar.
Thank you. I mentor a lot of folks and give advice and help out, and I am entrenched in the community. I am someone who was on the front lines in the trenches and help out, and will work with the community to make sure that we have those who understand what is happening in various parts of Oakland, various parts of Alameda, various parts of San Leandro, and in Sacramento. I will make sure I have a diverse team that will represent our district and Alameda County. And you are what we look like in America. So I think this is something that, I will hold myself accountable to make sure that, we do the work to get the people that will represent us and District 18, and that we're accessible and responsive, and that, we make sure that we have answers to your questions and work closely with the community and are doing a lot of outreach in that regard. But also working together. Thank you.
Janani.
I will bring into this role the lenses of my identities, the intersectional lenses of being the granddaughter of immigrants from a small South Indian village, the lenses of my identity as an openly lesbian woman, as a former community health worker, as a millennial, as a performing artist. And these lenses of my identity is essential to policies that I create. I'm not going to write one bill on racial justice and check off a box for the rest of that year. I'm going to make sure that I think about racial justice and immigrant justice and LGBTQ justice and inequalities and absolutely any bill that's drafted on healthcare, human rights, housing, small businesses. And the lens that I also bring is one of compassion and empathy, one that is seriously missing in this district. And that is why I will do everything in my power to create a district advisory board that includes the voices of youth, that includes the voices of elders, that includes the voices of community-based organizations who do not hold political and power and office because primarily they can't make endorsements and they don't have money. And these are the voices that are absolutely essential to be centered in this kind of political system.
Thank you. I think, Eugene, did you answer this? Yes,
I did.
okay. So we're starting with our next question.
Let's try Howard again, and if not, we'll go to Cheryl and then
Howard
Doug.
is on. Okay, and
Okay,
Victor will start. Victor will answer first. You are unmuted.
My question is this. What the Oakland East Bay Democratic Club learned from COVID is that COVID victims were primarily people of color, and 3 of the 10 zip codes in the Bay Area with high COVID rates were 94601, my zip, 94603, and 94621, as well as populations of people like me, senior citizens. And what I'd like to ask the candidates is this: what will you take away from the COVID experience and the way it affected people in these zip codes in East Oakland if you are elected to the 18th Assembly District?
Victor, you're responding first.
Thank you for asking that question, Howard. And I think as somebody who was personally affected, I lost my mother to COVID, and we can't bring her back. We can learn from what we need to do in order to change our system. What we need is equity. We need equity in the distribution of vaccines. We need equity in the distribution of testing. When we looked at reports, it was like 70% of the people who got tested were white folks. And it's like, come on, we have Black, Brown, and Asian folks and folks of color who were being left behind. And so we need to address these. As somebody who advocated, in San Leandro to make sure that we have mobile units, that we have testing sites, that are zip codes that are being highly affected, and our hotbeds for the coronavirus are getting the access and equity to these vaccines and the testing sites that they need. I am that champion. I am that voice, and that we need to make sure that there's equity, plain and simple, along all lines. And thank you for asking that question, because
Thank you. Shanani?
The inequities that we've seen laid bare during COVID are the same ones we've had all along. The root of many of these issues include racism that plagues our inequitable systems of justice, health, and supposed healthcare. When I started off being as a community health worker, I learned very quickly that maternal mortality rates of Black women are 4 times higher than their white counterparts. And that's not about 9 months of prenatal care. That's not about prenatal vitamins. That's about the quality of air you're breathing. That's about whether you've had access to healthy food or not. That's about whether you are experiencing violence in your home and in our communities. And what has been made very clear in this pandemic is the fact that health, education, environmental issues are all tied to rates of COVID. Children in West Oakland are 6 times more likely to have asthma, which are one of the zip codes with the highest rates of COVID. You can count on one hand the number of real grocery stores in Deep East Oakland. Violence in our communities are only escalating, especially in Oakland in the middle of this pandemic. And all of these things are connected, and we need to address things intersectionally in order to come up with solutions past COVID.
Thank you. Eugene.
Yes, thank you for the question, Howard. You know, a lot came to my mind during the pandemic, but one thing I will say is that I wasn't surprised regarding the disparities. Those zip codes that you just mentioned, also people who live in those zip codes also are likely to die 10 to 15 years sooner than folks living in the Oakland Hills, right? And so these disparities have existed for a long time, and it really just shows that we haven't invested in those communities. There are structural inequities causing these disparities. But moving forward in the assembly, what that means is there needs to be a paradigm shift. We need to invest equitably in the communities that haven't been invested in. And one thing that we know, and my experience is that oftentimes where you live, it has a significant contributing factor to how long you live. And too many Black folks and communities of color live in areas that don't allow them to live very long.
Yeah.
What I learned is that our communities need to have trust in government, and government needs to earn that trust. I've learned that when we band together, and I'm proud of the work that I've done with East Oakland City Council members, Treva Reed, to make sure that we've had the ability to provide access to healthcare, to protective equipment, the work that I've done with Shang Tao and the Oakland Mutual Aid Collective to ensure that we were able to mask up and get vaccinated, and the work that I've done through my nonprofit to make sure that we have had the ability to close the digital access divide when children needed it most. What I learned is that we need to make sure that in these moments of deep distress, that we have the ability to pull together, and that we need to have our communities represented in government and be the face of support. When we have that, then we can ensure that all of our communities can trust in the people who are coming forward to them, to ask them to get vaccinated, to use protective equipment, to be a part of the system. As a school board member, I dealt with many, many students and families who cried every single day wanting to be able to get back to school and reopen schools. And I was proud of my ability to do that, and the way that government operates to be able to make sure that that happens.
Next question.
Carol was next.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm actually a member of this club, and we heard a lot tonight from a lot of people, from all of you guys, and it all sounds good, but it always sounds good when you're on the campaign trail, and especially it always sounds good from politicians who use Black and brown people, especially those of us who are Black and Latino and Indigenous people. We always seem to be used a lot in these campaigns about what you can do for us and how you can do for us. And thank you, Ms. Bonta, for giving me the lead-in, the segue into this question, because it always seems like we can't do for ourselves, but we need to be represented. So my question to you is, what is it that makes you the person to represent this district that is overwhelmingly Black, Latino, Indigenous, that cannot be represented by, especially because it has not been represented by a Black person in a very long time? And really, what two committees, just tell us, what two committees would you want to be assigned to that chiefly represent the overwhelmingly Black community? Because usually people disappear elected.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
And I think we are starting with Janani, is that right?
Sure. I want to specifically mention that housing is my absolute top committee that I want to join, because If elected, I would be 1 out of 3 tenants out of 120 lawmakers. That very fact is why we don't have pro-tenant legislation that passes out of our state government. That's the reason why bills that are attempting to repeal Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act are turned down every year. This is not an issue in our supermajority of Californians about Republicans versus Democrat. This is often about individuals and political leaders who choose to take money from corporations and those who don't. And the issues that concern me involve housing and public safety and our criminal justice reform issues that every day when I'm out talking to voters in Oakland that they're concerned about. People are worried whether or not they're going to be evicted in a few weeks because our eviction moratorium is ending. People are scared whether they're going to lose their homes once again after this pandemic is over. People are scared that they can walk down the street and will be one of the many 1,172 people murdered by police last year. So the issues that concern this district, yeah.
Thank you. Eugene.
Sorry, yes, thank you for the question. You know, I've been walking around in my neighborhood in West Oakland talking to folks, and you know what I've been hearing is that they feel as though their voices are not elevated at the state level and haven't been. And so, you know, we look at the disparities that exist. And I mentioned earlier, as a Black man, I'm 20 times more likely to be a victim of homicide than my white counterpart in my 20s. Now, let's if that were switched, right? If my white counterparts were just as likely to be victims of homicide or were dying at those type of rates, we would see this as a crisis and we would invest our resources to address it. So to your point on what committees would I be on, the health committee and the budget committee. The budget committee is a representation of our values, right? And for too long, through our budgets, we have not valued Black and brown communities throughout the state. And so that voice is needed. And that's why I'm running. And again, appreciate the question.
Mia.
The two committees that I would be wanting to be on are appropriations. I think at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we value in the legislature and that we try to put forward end up dying in appropriations because people don't have the courage to make sure that our communities have the ability to be represented in the state legislature around the kind of legislations that cost money. Approps is where single payer healthcare went to die. Approps is where housing reform goes to die. Like all of these things that we care deeply about also often goes to appropriation. So that would be a key priority for me. And education, particularly the budget subcommittee, 50% of our budget goes towards education, K-16 system, and we need to make sure that those funds are used correctly. And by the way, I am Black. I'm a strong Black Puerto Rican Indigenous woman. I'm proud of who I am. And I have the experience, the life experience that tells me every single day that the color of my skin and the discrimination that I faced and who I am has been something that I've needed to protect, and I lift up and empower my community every single damn day.
Victor.
You're on mute, Victor.
Housing and environment. Thank you for that. My platform's simple: healthcare, housing, and justice for all. We need to make sure, housing is a human right, and the East Bay and all Californians should not have to fight for their homes. We have to strengthen our renter protections. We need to build more affordable transit-oriented housing, provide robust services to our unhoused neighbors, and curb gentrification, which has displaced so many long-time East Bay residents. And Howard Terminal will do this. I support ending exclusionary and racist zoning policies, which prioritize single-family homes and deprioritize mixed-income, multifamily, multi-unit housing. And for the environment, investing in the training and full benefits of new green jobs.
Okay. You froze. We're missing you. Are we ready for the next question?
Can we do the last two questions, 30 seconds, so the candidates can have a closing statement? Will there be enough time?
Let's ask, yeah, I think let's do the last two questions on that. What we had talked about doing, we can't get every question that everybody has, but we had talked about wanting to address a couple of the issues that have been touched on to some extent, but nationally and statewide and locally, the issue of police accountability has been at the top of the agenda, as it was in the last presidential campaign on the national level, as has been in the streets across the country. And the attack of the police on people who wanted to demonstrate and be critical of them. There has been a major movement for police, reimagining police. And at the state level, a lot can be done to reimagine the police and give leadership as a platform to this discussion, to elevate it to a higher level. What will you do? And what is your position about reimagining public safety? And what are the issues around reimagining public safety that come to fore? The second question we will try and get to around education and FICMAT and getting the state to forgive the loan that was forced upon the Oakland School District. And we will start with Eugene.
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe we do need to reimagine public safety and our criminal justice system, right? And we've seen, many instances on why that needs to occur. We need more accountability, and we need to center communities. I support Senator Kamlager-Dove and her efforts, multiple efforts, to move forward the Crisis Act, which would provide funds and grants to communities to allow for communities to address some of these issues that may not be suited for law enforcement and police officers. I also believe that we require too much of our police officers. There are times, when they should not be the only folks responding to whether it be a mental health issue or another issue. It may be better served to have our communities respond. And so, I think there's a lot that needs to be done. We've done some things, but there's a lot farther to go. We need accountability. We need to center communities, and we need to allow our communities to do the work and build that trust with the law enforcement.
Thank you. I think we did make it clear. We want to shorten it to 30 seconds so that we can get to your closing. Next will be Mia.
I think we need to make sure that we're prioritizing mental health first response and as a part of our public safety pledge to our community. We've lost too many lives because we've not had the right people in front of people who have been in crisis. I think we need more police transparency and more police accountability in being able to do that. And everything that allows for somebody to take advantage of our community, to show force against our community, to take the lives of our community are the things that we need to stop today.
Victor.
We need to stop being complicit. What we need to do is we need to end qualified immunity. We need to increase transparency and accountability in police operations. We also need to abolish the death penalty. We need to create trauma-informed and culturally responsive alternatives to policing. We need to eliminate jury selection bias, lower the incarceration rate by decriminalizing victimless crimes, ending mandatory minimum sentencing, supporting restorative justice programs, broadening California's mental health diversion program, and providing more supportive re-entry services to all of our California.
Thank you. Janani.
Mario Gonzalez, Stephen Taylor, Eric Salgado, say their names. I want to work towards a world where police and our carceral systems are not the solution to crimes, not the solution to domestic violence, mental health, or community violence. Instead of just putting a Band-Aid over these issues, let's get to the root causes of violence. Let's refund the restorative justice and community interventions that actually work. I'm a proud volunteer with APTP's MH First program. That keeps us safe. I'm a proud volunteer with Men Creating Peace, a restorative justice model to domestic violence. That keeps us safe. Let's prioritize these interventions and stop relying on institutions that cause us harm.
Thank you. Victor? No, that's it, right? For that question. Let's do the closing. We're down to 26 minutes. And if in that closing with your statement, you can at least maybe address whether or not you would support ending the loan requirements, forgiving the loan for Alameda County, for Oakland schools. We will start with Mia.
A question, Walter, how much time is this going to be?
Well, we have 26 minutes. Can we do, we got 3 people. Can we do a minute and a half each?
We have, okay, minute and a half, okay.
Mia?
One of my top priorities would be able to end the fiscal enslavement that OUSD has been under as a result of the state receivership and the FICMAT report. We need to be able to put Oakland in a place of lifting up our educational system and having the ability in the district with school leaders and board members to be able to take hold of what we need to have happen in Oakland Unified, particularly as it relates to reparations for Black students. So yes, number one priority would be to end that fiscal enslavement so that we could have the power within our district to be able to make the change that we need for our Black children.
Thank you. Victor?
The short answer is yes. And are we also closing with our statements, or is this just
Yes,
something?
yes.
So yes, I'm San Leandro Council Member Victor Aguilar, and I'm asking for your support to be your next assembly member for California District 18. Our state has great promise with Democratic majorities in both houses and our legislatures. We should be at the forefront of passing laws that provide protections for low income and working families. Honestly, I'm perplexed on why this is not happening more. We need to do more than just nibble around the edges. We need bold policies that will transform the daily lives of all Californians, the type of policies that will help put healthy food on the table, that make sure that we don't become homeless when we get sick. We must build a California where everyone is included, not only in the promise of equal opportunity, but pushes for equity outcomes. We need universal health care. We need safe and affordable housing. We need an equitable criminal justice system, and we need these things for everyone. We need fundamental transformative change to the old systems, and we need concrete and tangible solutions that will provide immediate benefit directly to the people of Oakland, Alameda, San Leandro, and our beautiful state of California. If you will allow me to join you in championing these changes, if you'll allow me to channel your voices in Sacramento, I would be honored and humbled to have your support as your next assembly representative for District 18. Thank you so much.
Janani?
First part of the question, yes, cancel OUSD that period. Rest of the question, I am running for assembly because the voices of our community members, especially in Oakland, have been left out of our political process. Our voices are being drowned by timid leaders who are too scared of the power of big corporate dollars, too scared of the power of special interest groups, and too preoccupied by the glamour of Sacramento politics and the traps of power and greed. If you're ready for someone who's going to be a fighter, who's going to push the needle on what we believe change can actually be for our communities, then I encourage you to support my campaign. I would absolutely love to work with all of you to build a movement, because this is not about one campaign. This is not about one state assembly seat. This is about a movement we have the ability to create across California. I'm not simply talking about policies like enacting a $22 minimum wage and implementing universal health care just because I think I can single-handedly do it. There are 2 special elections happening in the rest of this year. We have so many open seats available in 2022. We have more seats available in 2024. We have the ability right here and now, starting on June 29th, to create a progressive majority within our supermajority of Democrats, because that supermajority of Democrats has not been working for us. So join us, and I ask you to support me, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
That's the indivisible candidate.
Victor, Eugene?
Yes, and to the first question, I do agree in canceling OUSD debt. And again, I want to thank you all for allowing me to participate and being a part of this discussion and with the other candidates. I truly believe that we're at a point in time where we need to make bold decisions and move boldly towards equity. Right, we're in a situation where too many folks in California do not have the opportunity nor the access to achieve their full potential. And instead of kicking the can of opportunity and longevity down the road, now is the time to address those structural inequities, systemic inequities that have long existed in our society, and that the state plays a significant role in addressing, and to show that we value our communities by investing in our communities. For far too long, we have not proved that we value our communities because we have not invested in our communities. So again, thank you for the time, and I hope you support my effort for state assembly to move all of our communities forward.
Thank you all. This has been a very insightful discussion. around some of the most important issues. And thank you to all the clubs who were sponsors of this. There will obviously be more, and many of us will be on the other forums with other places where we'll understand a bit more about what's your positions are and how you interrelate with each other and what your differences are. Not a lot of differences came out tonight, but maybe we'll find out more in terms of distinguishing things. We appreciate everybody taking part. We appreciate the number of people who've been on the Zoom call. We had 100 people at a maximum for a very long time, and we still maintain a very high number of folks that are involved. Each club will be in contact with its membership to discuss how to go through the endorsement campaign. John George will be contacting its membership to discuss the vote and how we will develop our endorsements. You will hear from each of the clubs in the manner that they will communicate to you if they have not already communicated that to you. Again, thank you all. This has been an enlightening experience for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
The organizers could stay on.
Yes.
Yes. No neoliberals, no neoliberals.
Oh, God.
Free Palestine, free Gaza, stop the bombings. Stop the bombings, for God's sake. You guys have no funding because of Gaza, because being bombed and massacred. It's a freaking massacre. You freaking heard Zionist people in the freaking Democratic Party, except for the squad. And I have nothing to lose because I'm not running for nothing. Go ahead, AIPAC. Go ahead, destroy me. Corporate Democrats do not take Jewish money from Democrats, majority for Israel. Thank you.
Austin, respect our process. Respect our process. I know you have a position. But
we are
our
bombing
process.
Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. Okay, we are bombing them. Blood is on their hands. I'm pissed. It pissed.